And Gimli and Legolas, they stack up bodies and they count the number of dead. How many guys did you kill today? I killed 30. I killed 40. It's fine because they're orcs, right? But if they're not orcs, that is horrifying. In fantasy, often there's not much consequence. I think people can get this idea that writing is a very magical, special thing. The fairies come and wave their wand and there's sparkles and something special is produced. And I don't like that idea. I feel like it, writing is work, and good writing is the result of a lot of work. Well, people often talk about good or bad writers, but you can have such a thing, I believe, as a good or a bad reader. And Rich is clearly just a very good reader. He truly understands. A skill issue.
Welcome, everyone, to Two Round Podcast. My name is Richard.
My name is Austin.
Today, we have a somewhat special guest on. Sometimes he can, if we have the time, we can pull him on. Joe Abercrombie does his evil villain turn.
Welcome, Joe. We like to be nice and let some authors come on here sometimes. So you're welcome.
Occasionally, we'll share the line.
I feel honored. It's a privilege for me to be here. It's a privilege for you.
I will say the real privilege is being able to see your bookshelf back there, because
gorgeous.
You have my
best
dream.
Thing about me.
The only thing I want in my life is a library with a ladder. I want a bookshelf that requires a ladder, a rolling ladder. That's the dream.
Absolutely.
And you've already got.
Obviously the books are all just plastic.
Oh yeah,
facsimiles.
No, exactly. You just have to buy.
These days.
You just buy a bunch of encyclopedia copies and put them on the shelf, and that's all you need.
Exactly right.
Love it. Oh, for today, we're going to be talking with Joe here. Thank you for coming on, Joe, a bunch. I recently read your first Law series. We reviewed that. You have something to say about that, I know, too, because you saw one of our thumbnails, I'm sure. We'll talk about it. But we would love to talk briefly, yeah. We'll talk about mainly themes and characters in your books. We love your character work, and we have lots to kind of pick your brain about, maybe just about you as a person, and just find out some deep-seated things, because we find you fascinating, your book's fascinating, and maybe some people at home could get a thing or two out of this. Well, we can hope.
Yeah.
I am a well with no bottom. I mean, there's endless excitement to be drawn from the depths.
Oh, no
doubt.
Joe, if you have a problem having no bottom, you really need to hit the gym more.
Yeah, you're probably right. Too much bottom is closer to it, I would have thought.
Well, I guess to start off on a serious note here, as an author, what do you see as the themes in your books? And from the first Law ranging to your newest series, do you think that it is difficult to come up with a new theme and a new message that you're trying to portray from characters? Do you consciously think like, okay, I made a statement in this book, I need to come up with something new and fresh, or do you generally stay in a similar theme and similar genre?
Yeah, tough one to answer, actually. Wow. I mean, we've started big here.
It'll be silly goose questions next, don't you worry.
None of that. I suppose theme is sort of not the first thing I think about, if that makes sense. I think ideally theme is kind of what develops as you write a book. And there's always a risk of being a little bit didactic.
Oh, good author word.
Imply that, you see. Imply that I'm intellectual. There's always a risk of being a bit preachy if you kind of start with theme and wear the theme on your sleeve. And I want to be entertaining first. I like things that are big and commercial and exciting and entertaining. I don't feel there's any shame in writing things that are big and commercial and entertaining. I love Indiana Jones because it's beautifully made and it's clever and the timing's great and the editing's great and every aspect of the craft of that film is great. And so I don't think something's got to be deep and art housey in order to be interesting and exciting. And I think theme generally is what kind of emerges as you write a book. So, the Heroes is kind of, not wanting to spoil anything, it's sort of a war book, sort of an anti-war book. And it has some stuff to say about war, but I didn't start off writing that book thinking I've got a deep and important message about war.
Ah,
I wanted to write, a book about a battle, and the sort of bigger comments, if they're there, emerge as you go. And sometimes you notice them emerging as you go, and then you work on them a little bit more and you bring them out. But generally, a good theme is what happens as the result of the kind of interaction of interesting characters in the situation you've put them. So I suppose theme's certainly not the first thing I think about, and so I don't necessarily worry too much about repeating it either, because ideally, theme will sort of grow out of what you do, and
Right.
out of the book as you write it.
Mm-hmm.
I hope this does come off as somewhat insulting, but why did you choose fantasy if you don't like worlds, you don't like maps, you don't like themes, you love characters? Why choose fantasy to a world where you can develop themes and can develop worlds, but I guess why fantasy? Is it just a genre you like, again, entertaining, and you can put some fun stuff in?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's good from a research point of view.
Yeah.
You really don't have to be right about stuff or technically accurate,
Yeah.
which is intimidating.
That's true.
Very early on, when I started writing, I wanted to throw a character through a window, as you often do, and I started thinking, what kind of windows would they have? Would they, how much lead would there be? How big would the panes be? How thick would they be? Would you be able to throw someone through? Would they just bounce off? And then it occurred to me, I can have any kind of window I want, because it's fantasy. Right? I can have the window that explodes in the most glamorous and impressive spray of glass. I can have the window that works best for the drama of the scene. And so I like the freedom that it gives you. But I think really I write fantasy because I grew up reading it. I was a huge fan of Lord of the Rings and Tolkien when I was kind of in my early teens. I used to read it every year at Christmas, and I was obsessed with Tolkien. And then I got obsessed with David Eddings and, the other writers of the 80s who were kind of, Dragonlance, stuff like that, the classic straight ahead fantasy stuff of that period. And I played a lot of role-playing games. And so fantasy was in my blood up to a point. And whenever I thought of writing something, it was always that, even though I then went off and started reading other things, read a lot of crime and westerns and literary novels and historical fiction, all kinds of other stuff. I was always thinking about, I never thought I'm going to write a historical novel or a crime novel. I always thought, what is there here that I might apply to a fantasy novel? And so, yeah, fantasy has always just been what excites me, even though I think in some ways I'm more interested in the things fantasy has in common with everything else than the kind of the world building and the magical elements, which, are still important, but they're less important to me than the interplay of characters and the dialogue and the things that makes any story good, if you like.
Yeah, it's definitely impressive. Something I wanted to touch back on, you talked about how a theme normally develops out of the story first. So you come up with the idea for the story, the character interactions, and then a theme can emerge, or it becomes preachy. How do you kind of find that line? Because there's plenty of books out there where they were written at the outset of, I have something to say, and yet it doesn't come across as preachy. What do you find that line of when you're looking at your own book where you go, that may be a bit preachy, I'm going to dial that back? How do you know?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I suppose, as I say, I'm not necessarily theme forward, so it rarely kind of is too much in your face. I tend to be very much in the heads of the characters, and that's really where my first effort is always directed, to kind of making the characters as interesting as I can and giving them as powerful a voice as I can and giving the reader a sense of what it's like to be that person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you stay authentic to the true experience of the character, then hopefully you're not going to be preachy, because it feels kind of real and honest regardless. In a way, it's that kind of authorial voice, the insertion of the author instead of the characters that are in the book, that can make it feel preachy sometimes. But I suppose you read it over later, and when in the editing process and the revising, which I do a lot of, and is really most of what the writing is revising and going over. And if something strikes you wrong, you cut it out, you rethink it, you retune it, but generally it's a case of refining and kind of bringing those thematic things out a bit more. Try to draw out the similarities between the characters, the similar situations, the different ways a character might deal with similar situations. So you generally try to draw it out more than you are to suppress it, at least in my experience. But obviously, I don't tend to start from the point of view of, I'm going to write a book about capitalism and then think about how to plan it. I think I'm going to write a book with an industrial revolution setting with certain characters in different places. And naturally, you're going to start exploring that ground a little bit because the characters are kind of playing in that sandbox and you can't avoid it.
What would you say in hindsight after you finished the trilogy then? What would you say the message is of maybe most of your books, but I guess specifically First Law, if you had to take something away from it?
It's a tough one because it's a little bit like writing a blurb or writing the copy for a book. It's always the thing an author hates most to do is to kind of boil it down.
I'm so sorry.
That's why you wrote the whole thing.
That's what we're here.
Yeah, exactly. The reader's experience is always that, every reader has to take something slightly different away from it.
Yeah.
I suppose the First Law, it's a commentary on fantasy more than it is anything. It's a commentary on heroic stories. It's a kind of a cautionary tale about taking heroic stories too seriously, perhaps. Bald wizards who claim to have the best interest of the world at heart may not do so. Just something to sit on the other side of the scale. If, Gandalf arrives, maybe think twice about, giving the keys to the kingdom to that old guy. Because he might not actually be a nice old guy. He might not be a nice guy at all. Yeah. And don't trust banks. That's, of course, the other one. But if you don't know that already, then you've not been paying attention. Of course, I wrote it in 2006, universal. Right?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Prophetic.
It was published. I wrote in 2000, started writing in 2001, and it was published between 2006 and 2008. So back then, everyone did trust banks. I was a prophet.
Very prophetic. Yes.
Yeah. Now
it's very much a universal truth of don't trust banks.
Yeah.
Don't trust banks. But what would you say the morals of it are, or the themes of it are?
You've
read them more recently than me, probably.
Yeah. Well, that was actually part of our discussion. Is what was the message from the book, and a lot of the theme was at least how we saw it, was a kind of cynical message on characters that can change. So can someone truly change? Can someone grow? And
the world kind of pushes you down.
Yeah. And so is it your fault that you're in the spot you're at, or is it the world's fault that has done this to you? So that was where we were discussing. That's why with book 3, you're disconnect.
See our thumbnails like disappointed in the last argument of Kings. This author sucks, and I think that's
exactly the quote too.
Oh yeah, when Rich said that, I was like, Rich, you shouldn't say that about him. That's very mean.
Rich, that is out of order.
Yes, that's exactly.
Austin's my favorite now.
But when we were looking at it, our book club we do with our Patreon. One of the things we just, we're sitting in book club for 3-4 hours and we geek out. We like talk, what is the message? Everything that you hate, we like geek out over and go. Also, we love characters too.
We drew our own maps for it just because, you couldn't bother doing it. So we had a
little bit lazy, but that's fine. Yeah. But we geek out over the stuff you're writing. We love it. And I actually, from Blade itself, Rich has for the longest time was trying to convince me.
I will say, I hold for some. This is actually a unique opportunity.
Oh, yes. Well,
I've been going around saying, like, I personally love the plot of The Blade itself.
Yeah.
To me, it's arguably my favorite of the series. And I've heard everyone say, like, even the people who really, really love the whole series, they go, I'm not the biggest fan of the plot in the first book. And I think I've even heard from interviews of going, oh, yeah, I would tweak some things. Am I wrong? Like, do you think
your plot sucks?
Well, no. Like, is it weaker in the first book compared to sequel books?
All right.
Because personally, I saw it as a very much like a through line of I loved being the omnipresent perspective and seeing all of the little nuggets we get from each POV and always teasing of things to come. And so, like, the duel for me was so important because it was every POV had a different point of the truth, and so we as the viewer know something's coming, and none of the characters really do. And to me, that's super fun.
Just to show you how much Rich cares, like in the book club as well, Rich is defending, going, "This is the best plot ever written," and then all the patrons are going, "Hey, we love the book for the characters, not for the." So that's his whole gripe. He loves, he thinks you're masterful and your plot was interwoven perfectly.
Well, people often talk about good or bad writers, but you can have such a thing, I believe, as a good or a bad reader. And Rich is clearly just a very good reader. He truly understands. A skill issue, I think, would be the simple and easy way to explain that.
That sounds right. Yeah.
I guess I was going for like a thriller style plot. Have you read LA Confidential or any of the LA Quartet?
No,
James
I haven't.
Ellroy? So he has this approach with those books that he writes a very tight point of view, and they're kind of crime, thriller, mystery type books, but he follows several characters. So in LA Confidential, there are 3. There's a kind of used up insider who's incredibly cynical. There's a brash young idiot with a high opinion of himself, and there's a world-weary man of violence, funnily enough. And the 3 of them kind of come at this mystery, this crime, with very different attitudes and in very different ways according to their natures, and they each kind of unravel their own strand of it in order to kind of produce the whole. And I suppose the first law, in a way, has a structure that's not dissimilar to that. You kind of follow the individuals. It's very much from their point of view. They all come at something from a very different direction. And only over the course of kind of all 3 books, really, does it start to come together so you see what's there. Now, I think fantasy readers aren't necessarily used to that. So for some of them, it's a bit of a splash of cold water and it just doesn't really work. It doesn't meet their expectations, not what they're looking for. For some, it works much better when you get to the end and you kind of can see the whole thing. And for some, it still is not to their taste, at the end of that. And I think I would do it a bit differently now. The Blade itself was obviously the first book that I wrote, and so I was kind of finding my way on a whole load of things. And initially, I was really just messing around, experimenting with the voices, kind of just setting the characters off and seeing where they went. And so there was a bit of a lack of guiding, plotting thought going on. And I think some of that still exists in the final book. So if I was writing it now, I think I would try and have some more breadcrumbs in there, and I'd try and have more of a somewhat resolved plot within the first book, so there was a bit more self-containedness there. But I also wouldn't do anything radically different, because I think that was kind of the manifesto, right? It was to write fantasy in a slightly different way, bringing in some of the influences I had from outside. And so I still largely think it does what it does, and it largely works kind of on a page-to-page level. And in a way, I'm more interested in that than I am, hitting certain beats or giving it a filmic structure that is kind of immediately satisfying to the broad audience. Let's put it that way. The fact that some people don't like it, I will take as a badge of huge success.
Good. If you try and please everyone, you'll please no one.
That's very true.
But
well, I mean, usually there are, of course, people who do manage to please everyone. But certainly, I think if you, on the one hand, say, "Ooh, this is something edgy and dangerous that tries to do something new and push the boundaries and is raw and devastating," you can't also say, "Oh, but someone didn't like it, and that's very sad and upsetting." I mean, obviously, if you're trying to be challenging in some way, there'll be people who don't like it, and that's just something you've got to live with.
Yeah, at least my perspective was that there a lot of fantasy has that high energy action where there's a lot of these explosive moments, where at least the Blade itself felt far more like a Hitchcock novel of tension. That pretty early on, it just kind of set the bar of these characters don't know what's coming, but I do, and I'm starting to piece it together. And so I was feeling tense through most of the book. Not necessarily like... there were even scenes that weren't, on the surface level. That scene for that character is not that important. But for the rest of the story, it was. Of learning little bits of, when Giselle and all of them are talking about the Northman that comes through. And they kind of all dismiss him, but we know, actually the Northmen are really dangerous. vice versa of learning about bias through a different character, going, oh, actually, he's real. Anyway.
I suppose the question is, oftentimes some readers like that sense of taking it on faith that this is going to come together. And some readers don't trust that. They want to see the payoff much more quickly. And often, we've all been disappointed by things like Lost is a good example of something that, feels, it's full of these exciting mysteries. But then when you get there,
right.
It feels like
the
disappointing.
Cork on evil. What did he do?
So, some readers are more into, that sense of mystery and following things through and feeling, I'll wait for the answers and see what comes. And others not so into it. Just depends.
You seem to have maybe stoic is the wrong word for this, but an approach to, hey, people will like it or they won't. I can't control what they think. I guess your personal philosophy, what is your personal philosophy that influences your work? Not just the influences in these authors, but do you have a code, a philosophy? Are you religious? Is there something that makes you where it bleeds into your work?
I mean, I suppose everything that you are bleeds into your work somewhere. Everything that you think, everything you read, you watch, you play, you enjoy, you don't enjoy, all kind of finds its way in there. I mean, obviously, I try not to be kind of overt in the theme, as I was saying, and I try not to kind of be super political either. But I was writing The Age of Madness during, the period of Brexit and the kind of political mess that happened in the UK following that. Also Trump's first presidency and the kind of chaos that went along with that in the States. And so there was definitely a kind of, sense of political turmoil going on in the world. And that, without a doubt, kind of found its way in there. And I found that I'd, written the sequence of statues toppling. And then there was a whole thing in the UK with statues being toppled, like a statue of a slavery kind of a plantation owner in Bristol was thrown into the canal. And I went back and realised I'd written this stuff that seemed then incredibly on the nose. Like, obviously I was talking about this event, but I hadn't been. It just kind of came out that way.
So you didn't predict that event like you did with First Law and the financial crisis? That's different? Like you didn't write, imagine in 2019 wrote a big virus book. There was some virus thing that happened. Like you're just all your books are just an omen of the next year's big event.
Just make the devils a little bit worrying. Case, going down the road. Because the world obviously seems very stable and fine at the moment. So I'm sure there'll be nothing bad coming.
Oh crap.
So, philosophy, it finds its way in to things, I guess, without you thinking about it. It's impossible to keep what you are and who you are and what you think out of your books. And why would you want to? Because I think that's what readers react to, right? I mean, what I want to read if I read someone else's book is their unique voice, their unique way of seeing the world. I want to read a sentence I'd never have thought of. I want to read an idea I'd never have thought of. Right. I want to read a character that seems alien and strange to me, So, you can't keep it out and you don't try to. But at the same time, I don't think I'm kind of thinking, I believe this, therefore I must, smash this onto the book and smash the reader over the head with it.
Right.
It's just what happens naturally as you go. I mean, and from the point of view of philosophy and being stoic, I suppose over time I've just realized that people will react in all kinds of bizarre ways to everything you write down. A lot of it is about who they are as much as it is about what you've written. So, with The Age of Madness again, people have said it's obviously incredibly right-wing. Horrifyingly right-wing books. And others have said horrifyingly left-wing books.
It's just a horrifying book
opinions.
Is what it is.
That's what I'm hearing.
Horrifying, obviously horrifying.
It's obvious. The common thread, you're a horrifying writer.
I guess so. In the end, I think all you can really do is write the book. All I can do is write the book I like.
Yeah.
Right? My job is not to write a book that you like or that any particular reader likes. If you're chasing someone else's opinion, you'll never really write anything interesting, I don't think. You've got to write the book you love, or do your best to do it anyway. And that's the only taste you've got and the only thing you can really try and do, I think, anyway.
Then what is your favorite book you've written? Is it the next one? Is it The Devils? I mean, that's coming out in May, right?
No.
I mean, it's not because people haven't told me it's good yet, really, in large enough numbers.
God.
You have to wait for that.
You judge you judge by the consensus. Whatever
Up to a point, I
sold
do.
whatever sold the most for you is your favorite book at the moment.
Exactly. It's like children, isn't it? You say that you like them all, but actually you like the one who contributes most to your retirement fund. Right? I don't know. I think all old books kind of reach a point where, okay, I wrote that, it's done. I'm not worried about it anymore. I know that it did what it did and it works. New ones, you're constantly thinking, did this land? Is it going to land? Are people going to like it?
Right.
And there's a certain level of worry there. And it takes some distance from things before you really have an opinion on them. And obviously I hate whatever I'm writing at the time I'm writing it because it's always terrible and disaster until you have the chance to fettle it all down and edit it and rework it. And then you start to get to like it a bit more.
Yeah. You have kids, is that correct?
I do. Yeah, I have 3.
Awesome. How
What's the
old is your? Yeah, what's the favorite? how old is your oldest?
18.
Okay. Would you have your kids read your books, and at what age did you introduce them, or would you introduce them to any of your books? How does that kind of work?
They have been entirely welcome to read them at any time they wanted to.
Oh,
and
nice.
actually, none of them have, on the whole. my oldest daughter's reading The Devils at the moment.
Okay.
Okay.
So she's just started it. But generally, they haven't read much of my stuff, actually. They're just not that interested.
Are your
They
kids
know me, you see.
big,
They know I'm quite an uninteresting person.
Are your kids big readers at all, or they have different interests?
So my oldest daughter's a big reader. The other 2 less so. I mean, they were as when they were little. They were more into it when they were little. Now less so. So my son, who's my youngest, he's 13, is very surprisingly, very into video games. I hear that young men don't do that much these days, but
That's really rare.
apparently, yeah, he is quite into video games. More so than reading, I would say.
Yeah.
And my middle daughter is, not a big reader, I wouldn't have thought. No. Watches a lot of YouTube. That shit rot your brain, in my opinion.
Yeah, no,
don't do that.
Don't do that.
I've no truck with it.
YouTube is just the worst. It's the worst
Don't
for
go
people.
near it.
We do. I think this is the time we usually have every now and then a moment where we say to get off YouTube, stop watching our videos, and go
Touch
do something
grass.
else. And this is the moment. This is your chance because we're going to turn a little bit that silly goose portion. We kind of had a prepared bit for you, Joe. And this is the perfect time for it. I could swap the laptop back to you for the next one, but this bit that we have, the typical F, marry, kill. We're not doing that. It's called Steal, Collab, or Burn. And we're going to name 3 authors where you either get to steal their books, as in you wrote them, get to collab with the author, or you burn their entire works and their history. We're going to give you 3 names, and we really want to see deep down what you think about these people.
Do I have to do I have to use each one time?
Yes.
I can't just burn all of them.
No, nope. Unfortunately, you can't. You can't do that.
You can't boost your sales by burning everyone else's books.
That's unfortunate.
We have, as our first category, this is the somewhat grim genre we put this in. I kind of categorize this. The
Somewhat.
grim horror, you can see the patterns here. We have George R. R. Martin, Stephen King, and Pierce Brown.
Whew. And Mary wasn't an option because Pierce Brown is...
No Mary.
That would be
unfortunately
the obvious answer, but unfortunately
So it was what? Burn,
collab,
steal, or collab?
Yeah, you get to co-write a book with them, or the books they wrote, you get to steal them.
Steal, burn, or collab? Oh man, that's tough because I mean I like. Well, I'll probably collaborate with. I have collaborated with George a little bit.
Okay.
As an editor.
Oh,
he has edited stuff that I've contributed to. So maybe I shouldn't collab with him again.
You've already got that out of the way.
Right.
You see, I can't imagine it being an equal collaboration with George or Stephen because, to be fair, they both are of, I mean, if I'm there, then they're just, that tiny bit above in terms of sales.
Like a half
prestige.
step. Something like
the power dynamic is there. You want more control, so you'd have Pierce be like, yeah, Pierce, you can join if you want. Is that?
I see it as being more of an open exchange of ideas with Pierce.
So collab with Pierce.
Okay. I collab with Pierce, which leaves Steal or Burn. Well, I mean, It's just such a lot of material that Stephen King has produced.
You already
You know,
also
that you're
stole
gonna steal.
all of George R. R. Martin's stuff, so you know.
Exactly. Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I mean, I basically, you know, is there anything left to steal from George? I'm not sure there is. So I'll burn him
Yes.
on the basis that I can then, you know, try and absorb some of his readers.
Mm.
It
and
also would
steal
take
King's
away Game of Thrones
highly-
season 8 wouldn't exist.
The end of
Oh,
the
I have
show.
that power now.
Well,
Well,
I
if-
think
if you-
so.
if you
right? If
burned
you
it,
burn
yeah.
his books, like they're all
Oh,
gone.
it's all gone. It's all gone.
It's all gone.
deleted.
Okay. Well, yeah, all right. I'll burn George's material, which is a shame because I like it a lot. But I'll steal Stephen King's modestly profitable oeuvre. How's that?
I don't. What does that oeuvre mean? I'm learning things. Well, what is that?
Oh, it's like oeuvre is the work, the
okay.
the career, the expanse of their.
You're
I
learning
think
things
I think
today.
you are a philosopher at heart. I think this whole I just write entertaining books is
No,
just
no,
a
no.
shell.
No.
I think deep
think?
down you're a thoughtful man, and I think it's subtle. I think it's subtle. I'm seeing it, Joe.
He's just a
Are we
pretentious
edging
guy
up
that
towards
wants
3
to
stars?
sound better.
Edging up towards 3
I
stars
think
now.
I think it's edging there, and I also think Age of Madness was very far right and left. I think both were correct. I think you're just
You love this dynamic
go.
of the guy that rated your book disappointing.
I
It
love the
feels like
first
he
two.
has to suck up.
first
and
two were great.
I loved the book, so I get to feel like just
You can be ruthless.
yeah.
Yeah,
I don't
see.
feel bad.
I get how it is. Interestingly, the thing I'd say about left and right and all those things,
Yeah.
you'd hope if you're writing from type point of view that you can inhabit either position
Right.
and make it work, because these are clearly positions that people honestly and authentically hold. Therefore, you know, you should be able to write from that point of view and make it make sense.
Yep.
And some readers don't have trouble separating, you know, authorial opinion from character voice sometimes. So who knows?
I think that also contributes to something being preachy is a character that is written a certain way but doesn't gel with how they would be in reality. And it's normally like, oh, this is a caricature. You don't truly, like, the author doesn't understand that point of view, and it seems twisted. At least how I view it. Of when a character is acting in a way that doesn't make sense, but it makes sense for the message of the story. That's kind of where, to me, like the best example was Orson Scott Card's series, the Alvin Maker stuff. To me, I thought it was really, like, the second book on was incredibly preachy because characters were doing things that they were not set up to do, and they were just kind of broke every kind of character consistency and logic because it met the theme of the story.
I guess that for you, Joe, what do you think about self-insert characters? Would you advise that to first-time writers of, hey, maybe it's a good idea for your first book to do a self-insert because it might be easier. You can pull from yourself. Or do you not like doing that whatsoever?
I mean, I suppose the thing is that every character is you, right? I mean, when you
Okay.
write a book, all the dialogue comes out of your head. When you write an exchange between two characters, it's kind of you talking to you, which is weird. It doesn't feel that way when you're writing it, but I mean, it is all you. And, you know, different characters are kind of different aspects of yourself, filtered through different ideas and different experiences. So I don't know how you'd avoid putting yourself into a book, but at the same time, you don't want the kind of, you know, classic Mary Sue self-insert who, you know, is just a stand-in for the author reaping all those good things they want to have in life. I mean, the most obvious self-insert in my work is obviously Swarbrick, the cowardly writer, you know, in Red Country and Age of Madness, who's like a biographer, and he trails after Costco into the wasteland and comes horribly unstuck.
I mean,
So you want your self-insert to be as miserable and pathetic as possible, I think, rather than as glorious and heroic as possible.
I even heard with Glockta, you had back pain at one point, and that sort of brought some inspiration to Glockta. Not that you could relate to the torture part, I hope, but the back pain part, you just...
Well, I mean, he
use
tortures
that.
his readers.
That's also true. That's
Yeah,
also
yeah.
true. But is that
True.
a true story I heard? I feel like I've heard that somewhere.
Yeah, partly. I mean, so I had back trouble for a while, and occasionally still do now and then. And I had a particularly bad spell of it at one point. And, you know, had a lot of trouble moving around, really, and it does give you a kind of pretty crazy outlook on life. It's certainly a new way of looking at the world if you can't kind of, just a few steps up to the bathroom become this massive task you've got to plan and think about and strategize. Or what angle am I going to go? Am I going to crawl up? Am I going to go on my knees? Am I, it's a different way of looking at things.
Right.
And I suppose it also played into this idea that in fantasy often there's not much consequence. People they're violent, right? Fantasy is very violent. Lord of the Rings is a story about warriors mostly. Not the hobbits, but everyone else. They're warriors, they're killers. And Gimli and Legolas, they stack up bodies and they count the number of dead. How many guys did you kill today? I killed 30. I killed 40. It's fine because they're orcs, right? But if they're not orcs, that is horrifying.
Yeah.
That is terrifying stuff. But at the end, it's all fine. Aragorn can slay dozens, hundreds of people, orcs, whatever. And at the end, he can still be a sensitive lover and a positive king and a good friend. But in real life, you have a lot of consequences to worry about. People don't come out of that stuff clean, always. And so I suppose Glocta was this reflection on the consequences of being a hero, right? Of doing something heroic are not always great and not easily fixed. And sometimes you're kind of ruined for life and there's no way back. So it's kind of a meditation on that as well. But yeah, I mean, you put yourself into, any experience you have and anything that helps to make characters kind of authentic and believable. And you research stuff and you read stuff and, with battles, I read a lot of military history. I read a lot of, first-hand eyewitness accounts of battle and things. And that hopefully helps to make things, feel kind of authentic. You want them to feel arresting and original and sort of true if you can.
Right.
Which of your books required the most amount of research then?
It's difficult actually because obviously there were things that I knew about before starting. So I'd read a lot of military history before I ever kind of put pen to paper. So I kind of had a reasonable working knowledge of a lot of that stuff. And then say for the heroes, I read a lot more stuff specifically about kind of war and how battlefields work and chain of command. I'd studied human reliability. I did a psychology degree and what I did was human reliability and human error. So I kind of had this whole thing about failure and how plans go wrong and how complex systems fail and how, interactions between people cause these stresses on a system that cause them to go wrong. Charge of the Light Brigade is a classic example. It happened because the chain of command had 3 guys in it who despised each other and had very different ideas about how the army should work and what a man should be. And they just hated each other. And as a result, they behaved in this really bizarre way. And so, yeah, I tend to research quite a lot for every book that I write, but it'll be quite scattergun. It'll be all kinds of weird things. I mean, for the Shattered Sea books, which are kind of, Viking influenced, I'd read quite a bit about Vikings in the past, always been interested in the Viking world. But I read a lot more, some fiction, quite a lot of non-fiction about the Viking world, just to kind of pick out those details that make the thing feel a bit more honest, a bit more authentic. There was a lot about money and how money kind of percolated through the Viking world and how Christianity changed the Viking world and all these things that sort of found their way into the books in one way or another. So I research quite a lot, but it's quite scattergun. And I rarely kind of think to myself, as I say, what kind of windows would they have? I'm not so interested in getting that kind of detail, but I'm interested in the arresting, interesting things you might not have heard before, which gives some texture to the setting very quickly and can make the setting feel different, can bring a certain reaction from the characters. And ultimately, it's all about getting a sense of the character and the person. One example, so I read Frederick Engels' Condition of the Working Class in Britain, right, which is not a thing that a lot of fantasy readers will necessarily have gone through. It's pretty dense and it's quite long. It's all kind of observations about the condition of the working class during the Industrial Revolution in Britain. And one observation he was making was in Manchester slums, they kept pigs people would keep a pig in the front yard. So you got these small houses, little terraced houses and things. And in the front yard, they'd have a couple of pigs. They throw the rubbish to the pigs, and the pigs eat the rubbish. And then in winter, they butcher the pigs. And, it's a sensible thing to do. But the result is that there's just hundreds of pigs in the slums screaming and honking and crawling over each other, full of pigs. It's like a slaughterhouse there all the time. And that's just like, what a crazy idea that is. You never think of that. In Peaky Blinders, wrong period of time, but you don't see thousands of pigs in everyone's front yards. It's not something you think about.
I think it would ruin
once
some
you put
of the
that
shots.
in there,
Probably.
yeah. Once you put that in there as a detail, it's that's fascinating. What effect does that have? When someone hears all those pigs screaming, when slaughter time comes, what's the feeling for the characters who are there, who've heard it, who have to look at it? And then it gets something different out of the people. And that's always what you're kind of looking for in research. How am I going to get something that is interesting and meaningful? Those kind of ideas are what I think make good world building.
Oh, so you do care about world building a little bit.
Yeah.
There we go.
Also, that was a very great response and thoughtful. Let's get back to the stupid game. Rich, what's your...
I had another question.
No, what's the silly game? What's the next one?
Fine. Silly game it is. All right. So back to Steal, Collab, Burn. This is your fantasy grandparents. Really ages us here. Ursula K. Le Guin, J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis.
Well, I'd burn C.S. Lewis because...
Why was that so quick?
Really,
That was a quick decision.
Wow.
it's I find, out of those three, I mean, he's like, nah, not that interested. It's fine and all, but it's, nah. So I've got Collab and Steal. Well, I've stolen quite a lot of Tolkien already, haven't I? Again, we got that problem.
Kind of the anti-Tolkien in a way, right?
But this, if you stole him, you would get the credit then. See, right now you're stealing, and people are like, you just stole a lot from Tolkien. But this time you get to steal it and take the credit for it.
Well, in that case, Tolkien then, because, he does bestride the genre like a colossus, doesn't he, still?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hard to avoid him. Not quite as much as he did when I first started writing, I would have thought.
Also, I would imagine he would not be a fan to collaborate with you. He loves his maps and his,
Oh, yeah.
how he goes about world building. You'd probably clash a little bit. Or it would actually be like a great collab.
Just
because you have
magnetic.
different strengths.
Different strengths.
Yeah.
How would you...
You
what
see,
do you see
I
with
think
Le Guin too?
Le Guin quite
Yeah.
intimidating, right, to collaborate with also.
Yeah.
Because she's got that whole thing of just telling it like it is, unvarnishedly. Actually, your writing is quite shit. She would be saying,
She does that?
Joe, you're not that good. Well, I get the feeling with the Le Guin, she kind of reached this point of, I'm just gonna tell people that I think basically a lot of writing is bad. And she's so good.
Yeah.
Her writing's so good that actually it's a bit intimidating. You can't exactly say, well, you're bad. She's really good, right?
When you're arrogant, but you have the receipts to prove it. It's
that's always
I think of her and Tolkien as kind of the two grandparents of my fantasy experience, because a lot of the other fantasy I read was just so obviously in thrall to Tolkien and imitating Tolkien, the Eddings and the Dragonlance, very much in the same mold of the huge, big, expansive worlds with lots of detail and so on. And Le Guin was much more short books, very tight, very evocative, achieving a lot with a very few words. So, I've always admired both of them, but, Tolkien obviously has been much more successful overall, so I'm going to have to steal his work again, simply on the basis of its dollar value, and collaborate with Le Guin. And probably come out of it with an extremely low opinion of my own abilities, even lower than it already is.
We got to say the most impressive thing of thinking about book one, your first book, Play Itself, was the prose was already from the get-go. We loved it. That I guess, did you have experience prior to that where you were a practiced writer? And what was your build-up before release? You wrote it 2001, you said? So before that point.
Yeah, started in 2001.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. I remember Fellowship of the Ring coming out when I'd written 3 or 4 chapters. And being like, wow, fantasy man, yeah.
It's on the up and coming, right?
It's quite a boost, yeah.
So I guess prior to that, were you in script writing? I thought I saw a little bit about your history there, that you were in shows or you did something in the business.
I was an editor.
Got
I
it.
was a TV editor. So
That
I
makes
did
sense.
a lot of weather porn. You know that, like shows about tornadoes and hurricanes and kind of floods and stuff. I did a lot of those sort of documentaries.
I've never heard it
And
put
I
that way,
also
but
did-
yes, that's an apt description. Yeah.
Yeah. Wayne and Lillian had no idea that the fastest winds on Earth would soon envelop their trailer home. That kind of thing. Yeah. A lot of that. And I did a lot of live music stuff as well. So it was a combination of those two.
Nice.
So I was an editor, and I worked on scripts a bit as an editor. You know, I certainly was in the room while people were working on scripts. That was quite a big part of what I was doing with documentaries. But I'd never really written anything particularly. I'd had a stab at writing the same kind of fantasy novel when I first came out of college, and it was really quite bad. Very pompous. Same characters, same settings, same ideas. Glockter wasn't in it because I hadn't done my back in yet. And but you know, it was the difference between Logan would tear his clothes off and stand under the waterfall and be washed clean in that draft, right? And then the later draft would be he'd kind of cut himself trying to cut out of his furs, and then he'd fall over and he'd brain himself on the rocks and fall in the water and nearly drown. That was kind of the difference. It had gone from very heroic and pompous to much more self-aware and tongue-in-cheek, I think.
Kind of, you grounded yourself a lot. You said, you know, I'm taking myself too seriously. I don't like the way I sounded trying to be all highbrowed. Is that sort of what it was?
Totally. And I mean, I'd read a lot of other things in between. So, I mean, Game of Thrones I'd read.
Yeah.
And that had a big impact on me, big impact at the time, for sure. Because prior to that, all the fantasy I'd read, or a lot of it, had been in the kind of classic epic mold. You know, some of the more literary stuff, I mean, this was before the internet. There was no internet. There was no fandom. I had no contact with anyone who was kind of well informed about the genre particularly and could have pointed me towards more interesting stuff. So it was purely what was in the bookshop window, you know, which was Dragonlance and David Eddings and Terry Brooks and that kind of, you know, classic fantasy of the 80s and 90s. And so Game of Thrones really blew my mind when I read it, because it was like, wow, this is character focused, shocking, surprising, subversive, you know, has this gritty, dark world. And that is very character focused, you know, very much in the heads of the people. And that seemed to me the sort of thing that had been missing from fantasy a lot of the time. And that I'd seen in some crime stuff in you know, James Ellroy and Westerns. Larry McMurtry, I don't know if you know Lonesome Dove.
My favorite.
Just
book.
read that. Yeah. Awesome book.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Fantastic book. Yeah. So is that kind of rawness and kind of surprising quality to the characters and the real quality of the dialogue and so on. I'd always thought, why don't people do that in fantasy? And then obviously I read Game of Thrones, just like, that is exactly, or to some degree, a lot of what I felt had been missing. And that made me think, oh, you can do that. It will work. And that was sort of quite a big spur to me trying again to kind of, you know, adapt what I had tried, the more pompous version, into a kind of a different take, I guess.
I guess this is a good pivot for, because it seems like you got that realism, that grittiness, and you got those influences from George and others. Larry McMurtry, I'm so glad I just read it, because I totally get what you're saying. And good transition to where you got your humor from, because we could start this with another Steel Collab burn. I have 3 humor fantasy authors who I would love to see who you'd Steel Collab and burn here. We have Douglas Adams, of course, Terry Pratchett, of course, and Martha Wells with All Systems Red in the Murderbot series. So funny. Of those 3, have you read from all 3 of those authors first off? And then if you have, who would you say?
Douglas Adams and Pratchett, yes. Martha Wells I haven't read, which is poor. So I suppose I'll have to. What would I do?
You might really appreciate her books. They are a lot of fun.
Have I got to burn them because I've not read them?
Oh, okay.
I mean,
they're burned then.
If I've got to pick one,
yeah.
Maybe I should collaborate with her, because it would be an exciting new thing, right?
Yeah, they're
and actually collaborating with the other 2 would be a bit of a one-way experience, I feel,
Right.
these
Right.
days, don't you? So, I mean, I think I'd steal Pratchett, and
Oh yeah.
I suppose that means burning Douglas Adams, doesn't it? Which is a shame.
Oof.
Poor hitchhikers.
I like his stuff.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know where it comes from. I don't know, where does humour come from? It's one of those weird things. Humour is very hard to pin down, and I try with writing to take all the mystery out of it. I think people can get this idea that writing is a very magical, special thing. The fairies come and wave their wand, and there's sparkles, and something special is produced.
You just gotta
Especially
experience the character. You just gotta live the character, and then the character.
But it's a
will
magical
come onto
thing
the
that
page.
magically happens, and I don't like that idea. I feel like it. Writing is work, and good writing is the result of a lot of work, and so any idea that is kind of about the muse visiting and so on, I try to avoid. But I think two things where there is an element of magic: characters. You try the same thing twice. One time the character works and is instantly interesting and has a voice, and another time they don't work. I don't really know why. I still don't know why. And I still can't necessarily predict when they'll work and when they won't. And the other one's humour. I mean, you can't just be funny, can you? If someone says, right, be funny now.
I mean,
how do
you could always just drop your pants. That normally gets a chuckle.
Oh, well, that
Is that
would
just
be
my
terrifying,
experience?
I
in
think
my
that's
case.
when
Just
people look
that's
at
just
you,
me.
yeah,
Darn.
Yeah, I suppose you could try.
That's why
But
Jim
it's hard
Carrey
to
is
just
one of the
be
best.
funny.
That physical humor. He's always
Yeah. So I don't know how you go about being funny. I think for me, I just never wanted to remove anything that was funny. I always felt like something being entertaining and having some wit in it. It doesn't need to be slapstick, but I'm interested in characters that have that powerful voice, and part of that is that a character has their sense of humor and their way of seeing the world that allows for some funniness, and the collision between different cultures and different styles of characters often is rich ground for things that are ludicrous or absurd or funny, and things that are horrible and violent often can be funny at the same time. I suppose Quentin Tarantino, is a director who often, not always successfully for me, but when he is successful, is very good at kind of seeing the ludicrous in the very violent and horrible. Yeah. And the two can kind of, they make each other more intense when it works well. So the horrible thing is more horrible for the funniness, and the humor is more funny for the horribleness, if you see what I'm saying.
Yes.
So I think the two work very well together if you pitch it correctly.
Well, I think it's the non-controversial statement of, at least I personally think so, the funniest character from First Law was Glokta. And he's also the most tortured and most in pain character. But also, I think he has, just talking to you a little bit, I think he has the most similar style of humor to you. Where...
Yeah, maybe.
I would say... Giselle has more of a situational humor. It's funny to laugh at Giselle of the situations he's in. Logan is funny in the sense of it's his repetitive nature. It's just the amount of times you say one thing about Logan Nine Fingers. Say that it's just
good accent. Nice guy.
It's just funny.
I imagine that's very much how he talks.
Thing is, at the beginning, you think, oh, this is the narrator saying it. But then you kind of realize, this was in my head, of that's what Logan says to himself. That's Logan saying it, not some narrator. And he calls himself in the third. That's at least how I saw it. It got funny at a while. That's how he thinks. Say one thing about Logan Nine Fingers. Say that he's reliable. It's just...
And that's the other thing, too. You said that consensus. Until you send the book out there and know, hey, did people find this funny? Did people like this? Because you could be cracking up or think this is just dry and horrible. Do you need that somewhat confirmation to go, okay, I think I landed somewhat?
Oh, and when I first started, I suppose the difference between the first pompous effort and the second was the pompous one was my attempt to write something that I thought fantasy should be, or that I thought people would like. I wasn't really thinking about an audience, but I suppose it was like the things I read, and it was my attempt to imitate a style. And the second effort was really my attempt to just write the way that seemed right to me.
Yeah.
It was more kind of honest, I suppose. So I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going with that.
Well, I think where you're going is you need people like us to review your books. You need the confirmation sometimes. So you seek
Sometimes
out
you do.
You seek out people like us, and you go, oh, what do Rich and Oz think about Devil's coming out or the next book, and we'll let you know.
In the future, definitely.
Well,
we'll
of
be
course.
the first port of call for sure. Yeah.
I guess
when I first started sending it to agents and things, though, I thought, this is weird. This book's weird. It's a weird mixture of funny and horrible. Is it too violent? Is it not funny? And humor is a very personal thing. No, not everyone finds the same things funny. So, yeah, I had no idea whether it'd land at all. But I think you've just got to, as I say, write the book you like and leave it all on the table. And hopefully some people will agree.
I think we're leaving the elephant in the room here, and we should talk about it.
What's the elephant?
We've been talking about different genres, what you kind of express in your work. The biggest thing right now, taking the world by storm. I mean, it always takes the world by storm, but romance. I've got 3 romance authors here to, of course, steal, collab, or burn, and kind of want your thoughts on romance in your books, because I know we've been talking First Law, it's just fresh in our heads, but romance in all your books, of course. But what do you think about romance in books? But first off, here are the 3 authors. Steal, collab, burn. We have Rebecca Yarros, of course, Fourth Wing. We have Sarah J. Maas, and we have Colleen Hoover. Those are the 3 biggest names I could think of right now that are in the game. And I haven't read we've read Fourth Wing and ACOTAR, but aren't well versed in the rest. But very curious on your thoughts on romance. Who would you want to steal, collab, burn here? Choose wisely.
Well, in terms of romance from a genre point of view, or romantasy, as they is quite a hot button term of late. It's not something that I'm massively familiar with, I'll be honest. I mean, I haven't read many books that are later than about 2002.
Oh, okay.
I don't read a lot of modern fantasy, even, let alone other stuff. So I haven't read Rebecca Yarros. I'm obviously aware of the huge impact those have had and how successful they've been. And Maas also, obviously, has been massive. And, these authors are, well, I mean, I don't know if they probably are bigger than like Brandon Sanderson and other such, people who are the biggest writers in the epic fantasy kind of realm. I think if you're in the epic fantasy realm, it's easy with a kind of slightly myopic way to feel like, well, George R. R. Martin is like the tippity top of all authors, And actually, these guys are probably outselling George hugely, or would be if he'd written a book. Whereas Brandon, obviously has just had a book out. I'm sure he's selling a huge amount, probably less than those guys, though. So I don't know.
It's incredible.
It's weird to think about.
Sanderson at Dragonsteel Nexus, his speech was about gatekeeping in fantasy and how people are just being introduced with ACOTARs and Fourth Wings and then going to books like his The Way of Kings, and that not to gatekeep of what gets you interested in the genre. So it was a great speech on just, hey, we at one point in history, we were the ones made fun of a gatekept, like, oh, you read fantasy? That's not real literature. And then that you're not in the club. So that you see that happening now with romantasy books, and seriously, they're just as popular as anything we read. We think, like you said, George is the top of the game, top of our game in this kind of genre. But yeah, there's plenty out there. But I guess since you haven't read those 3 books, maybe you can't answer the Steal, collab, burn. We'll give you a pass on that. I think we'll give you a pass. What do you think, Rich?
Yeah, because he'll just steal the one that makes the most money.
That's true. We don't want that. We're trying to tear you down a little bit.
Well, I'll steal Rebecca Yarros's huge success in being young and new.
Okay.
I mean, that would be great, wouldn't it?
You want that youthful
to be young
energy?
And new, to be a fresh new voice.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be incredible. I remember those days. So well, let's do that again. And then I suppose I'd collaborate with Sarah J. Maas, because she obviously would bring in so many happy readers.
Yes.
That'd be a wonderful thing.
Yes.
And
What do you think about
that means I'm burning whoever the other person was.
Colleen
which
Hoover? Colleen
I
Hoover.
apologize
we have
for.
not read, but she's big in the. She does romance. I don't think romantasy.
No.
I think it's.
I mean, they
contemporary
burned Joan
romance.
of Arc, right? So
Ah.
there's a rich tradition there.
Okay.
One should take pride.
She should
in
take
that.
pride in that.
What do you think about the description of even sex scenes in your book, and how much do you go into it? What is too much? Do you kind of have a rule in your head for this is how descriptive I'll get?
No, not a rule at all.
Yeah.
I mean, as with all these things, you write something and then you go over it and revise it a lot. And so I suppose you're thinking what is arresting, what is interesting, what is authentic, what's working, what's not. And you're chipping away at it and trying to find interesting ways of doing it that always generally show you something about the people, and so I guess my way of looking at sex scenes is, as with violence, as with any scene, it becomes a bit dry and uninteresting if it's simply a description of the mechanics, right? Same's true of a fight scene. I'm not that interested in he raised his sword to a 35-degree angle in order to counter the position of Sir Bloveld's shield.
Blofeld.
And then he struck. I don't know why I'm saying that. You know what I mean? I'm not interested in the technicalities. I'm interested in what does it feel like.
Yeah.
Right? What's the emotional involvement? I mean, is this person a experienced fighter who is thinking about the technicalities, or is it a naive young person who's terrified and pissing their pants? What's going on? What's the emotional experience? I want the reader to feel like they're there. I don't want it to be a technical instruction manual. Likewise for a sex scene, I think, what's the point here? What you're trying to do? And if there's things you can do that are surprising or that are interesting or that, knock the reader off guard, give them something they're not expecting, I think that's all interesting too. And also being honest about it up to a point and not trying to do, the kind of heroic version any more than you do the heroic version of a cavalry charge.
Right.
If I do a cavalry charge, it's liable to turn into a mess because cavalry charges often do. They're certainly not clean and crisp generally.
Mm-hmm.
And likewise with a sex scene, I think it's actually more interesting, if it is with the edges left on, if it's kind of rough and ready and a bit weird and says something about the people. So I suppose that would be the approach. And it's really the idea is to take the same approach to that as to any other aspect of the characters' lives.
I like that a lot. We're fresh out of Dragonsteel, and Wesley Chu, if you know him as an author, he's great guy. And he was talking. He said your point, and then you went into more detail here where we got to see this. But he was talking about fight scenes like your sex scenes, and I think he was getting at a very similar point to you, where, and obviously it's a choice because some people do want to read, and then there's other genres out there. But for your purposes, you want to get something more out of it. And I guess, is there something else, another comparison where you'd go, okay, write fight scenes, like maybe not fight scenes, but I guess write your character's inner monologue in a certain way. Fight scenes are one, maybe it's more quick action, but when you're doing a character monologue or internal voice, is there something that you think is important there to touch on, or is it really just getting who is this character? And I guess, how do you get into that character's head? What is the trick there? The one trick. I'm sure there's lots. But
I think that is the thing. It's going back to the magic.
Yeah,
it is very hard to kind of, if you could just do one thing that gives you an insight into the character, one technique that makes a character work, then you'd have solved the question of writing altogether in a way there, because that is the essence of it to me. That's what makes writing. For me, that's what good writing is the writing that really gives the reader very quickly a sense of the person. Elmore Leonard is one writer that I really like a lot, and he's a guy who can just, the writing seems very simple. It doesn't seem complicated. It's short, it's punchy, it's workmanlike in a way, but he has this trick of kind of giving characters a personality just with one line of description of a behavior. So he writes these Western stories, and I can remember reading a page where he introduces these three characters, and they all just instantly, you get a sense of who they are without apparently anything happening. there's just a way a guy handles his hat gives an impression of him being too big for his boots. A way a guy introduces himself makes him seem humble and kind of like there's a lot going on under the surface. And he just has this incredible knack of creating people very quickly. I think what I try and do is just write from a point of view and see what happens sometimes. I mean, usually I'll have a sense of who the character is and the role they're going to play, roughly. But then a lot of the good stuff is what emerges as you go. So say with Logan, his kind of repeated catchphrases and his kind of earthy wisdom and so on. Most of those, I didn't start out saying, oh, this is a guy who's going to have lots of earthy catchphrases. They were just things that happened in the writing that I'd then say, that's kind of cool. That seems right for him. That gets to something. And then would repeat them, and then they become not only a kind of motif that reinforces your sense of the person, they kind of allow you to then make these sort of in-jokes and, wrong foot the reader from time to time and do things that are funny or different, And so that was just a technique that developed as I went. And then with Glockter, he has this internalized monologue that obviously is him talking very directly to the reader in a way. And he'll say one thing and he'll think another, and that contrast gives a certain sense to that character of him being quite duplicitous and, you don't see the whole man on the surface, but the reader gets to see the whole man. With Ferro, she uses a certain kind of physical arrangement of lines on the page. She tends to have paragraphs of short sentences, then a punchline, and then a paragraph and a punchline. And it kind of creates a sense of this quick thinking and this almost stabbing thinking. She's a very aggressive, fierce person, and the rhythm of the prose tries to reflect that. She's also colorblind, so there's no colors in any of her descriptions. It's always bright or dark, and that gives everything this kind of monochrome sense, which suits the way she sees the world, which is very, very monochrome, Then some characters, say Savine is very canny, thoughtful, always looking at other people. What can she learn? What can she infer from their behavior? Looking for the weakness, looking for the political kind of move. So she's a lot of thought about other people and their expressions and what they're thinking and their body language and what she can infer and what she has to gain. Whereas Leo, who's kind of her reverse in a sense, is barely even notices what other people are doing. It's all about him and how he's feeling and his thoughts about stuff, And so you're trying to find a mode of expression and a rhythm and a kind of language that reflects who the character is and kind of gets into their head as much as you can. But a lot of it is a happy accident. And dialogue is massively important as well, because that's always the most efficient way to kind of get a sense of a person, because a good exchange of dialogue can kind of give you exposition very elegantly, can tell you about place and setting and plot, but it also at the same time will develop both the people who are talking to each other and the relationship between them. So it's kind of working in film and TV a little bit has made me realize how rendering stuff into dialogue can do very elegantly and quickly what takes quite a lot of time if it's internal monologue or kind of authorial exposition. Sorry, that was long and tedious.
Not at all.
What advice would you give to a newer author on how to develop that voice? Like you're talking about how the aspects with Logan and Glockta kind of develops over time. But I would say like from chapter 1, Glockta's character voice is pretty well set. Did you have to develop, like as you're writing, developed it and then went back and changed things?
Yeah.
Or were you
absolutely.
kind of like, okay. So
you're reading it after the fact.
Yeah.
Really. So it didn't start out anything like as well as that. And my advice would be write a scene and then, go over it. Write a paragraph and go over it. Every time you start writing, go over what you wrote last time, rethink it, chop it around. How does it work if you cut stuff out? How does it work if you change that into dialogue? How does it work if you put another person in the scene so that it becomes an exchange and a kind of...
Okay.
And that's kind of what I did when I started, was I spent a lot of time rewriting and rethinking and just sort of experimenting with the rhythm of the writing and how to pace a scene, where to come in and out of a scene. And the voices of the characters, generally things are more neutral. When I write a first draft, I'll kind of write a relatively neutral first draft that's more in my natural voice, if you like. And then over time, I'll get a better and better idea of who the characters are, what works and what doesn't. And I'll do a whole pass through the manuscript where I'm specifically will work on all the chapters from one point of view at the same time to try and get kind of as much consistency and as much distinction to each of them as I can. And some of that's very basic stuff, like, you know, some will use contractions a lot. Some will use very kind of colloquial ways of, you know, talking, to swear a lot. Others will be more sophisticated, have longer, more varied vocabulary. Some might have really over-the-top, ludicrous, thesaurus mining vocabulary, which kind of implies a certain pompousness and a high opinion of themselves. So you're working on the rhythms of speech and trying to get those consistent. And there's no shortcut to just doing it. Get a draft down and then go over and over and rework and rethink and, you know, look at different parts. So these days I have a much more efficient kind of way of going at it, which is I'll write a first draft and then I'll do a few kind of structured passes of revision where one will look at the kind of plot movements and the major structural things and try and make sure stuff is set up in the right way and pays off in the right way. One will look at central character voice and try and get each chapter the point of view as distinct and consistent as I possibly can. And that'll probably include the arc of that point of view character, trying to get that right and set up. And then one will be all the secondary characters, trying to get them. I start with a lot of eyebrows. She raised her eyebrows. She raised an eyebrow. There's loads of eyebrows, 10 a page when I do a first draft. And then I'll do a pass where I'm trying to get each secondary character distinct. So not eyebrows now. What does this person do that is distinct?
You and Sanderson got some beef. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Oh God, I can't.
Oh, you don't know that?
Oh,
That's infamous.
You can't unsee it once someone tells you of.
With the eyebrow, does he do a lot of eyebrows?
He does so many.
Yeah,
So many.
he's our favorite author.
I mean, I still do a fair few,
yeah.
to be fair.
Yeah.
But I try to, give each character a tick or a style. Is this person a twitchy person? Is this person calm and smooth? Is this person, have they got a messed up ear have they got a rash? Have they got something about them that is kind of, distinct and gets at something within their character? So I'm trying to work on their dialogue and their behavior to make it as distinctive and individual as possible. And then I have another pass where I do the same thing with the setting. What's the time of day? What's the weather?
Oh, yeah. Just based on how you've seen Rich so far, what would you say his tick is? What would you say, like, if you were giving Rich a tag of not a rash or so, what would you say that's his descriptive feature?
I mean, it's calm and thoughtful silences.
Oh,
ready to explode at any moment into revelation. That would be my judgment. My totally honest judgment. Obviously.
Spot on. Just say,
oh yeah, I got to the heart of it.
Should see him after.
So yeah, revise, go over, rethink, redo.
Sounds like it's the process of writing is to find the character's idiosyncrasies.
Yeah.
And then go back to backfill and make those idiosyncrasies consistent and repetitive.
Yeah.
That was
And make
way
them
better
all
said.
feel
Like, you summarized what
like
he said for
individuals.
5 minutes just like that. It was a great job, Rich.
I know.
But that is, I guess, the question for you as well on this, because you've talked plenty on channels and talk about your characters. I'm sure some of this stuff you've said before, and a lot of times people are asking you questions about this because we admire what you're doing with your character work. I'll ask the first question, go to the second one. First question is, do you ever tire of talking about the same thing again and again when it comes to something like this? Honestly, because I know that it's the passion. You love writing, you love doing fantasy. Is this sort of thing more like, okay, I've talked about this a lot, or do you enjoy that aspect of it? On an honest note, like, we won't be offended anyway. Of course.
I mean, I do enjoy this aspect of it, definitely. And it's, often you'll be surprised what you come out with. You'll be surprised what you know, when you start talking about it. So no, I do enjoy it. I guess that around the time a book comes out, often you're called on to do a lot of interviews and a lot of kind of events. And then you will go over the same ground a fair bit. And often there'll be certain questions about a book that you'll end up answering a lot.
Yes. Yeah.
But that comes with the territory, I quite like the chat. I enjoy doing that.
You basically get to revise your own speech in real time. You get to go back and come up with one answer and then keep correcting it till it sounds good.
Yes. But we're not editing
Yeah.
this. We're not making you look good at all.
No,
It'll be
no.
straight cut. You get what you get.
I've been very surprised how much editing goes into a lot of different podcasts that I never noticed.
Yeah.
And we have not really done too much of that.
Nick does a great job. He's awesome.
Well, he edits, but he edits the way we want. Like, the cut out the beginning, cut out the, end, and then edit our audio so it sounds good. But for the most part, he leaves us being stupid in it, which is the important part.
That's emphasis. Yes. I guess that's a question for you. Shout out Jed Hearn, Jed's great guy, great friend, where he connected us in the first place, saw him on your channel, and he loved Jed. Question for you then, of stealing, collabing, or burning with Daniel Green, Jed Hearn, or Tudor Ramble? We got to hear, because we know you've been on both of their channels, and we'll take the brunt of it. We just kind of want to hear what you have to say.
What, have I got to compare the three of you now?
Yes, of course.
Both of them have written things we have not.
That's right. It's not book. We're just saying if you could steal their YouTube channel, steal their...
Okay.
Well, Daniel's probably got the most kind of established channel there, hasn't
Bastard,
he? In terms of actual followers.
Yeah.
So I'd have to steal that, I suppose.
Say one thing about Joe Abercrombie. Say he follows the money.
No doubt.
All back to the
what are we
base.
really all here for, anyway? Is this art? No. So I'd steal, then I'd burn. Who would I burn? Well, I'd have to. I mean, I've got to burn Austin because of his 2.5-star review for Last Time at Kings.
I'll follow. I'll fall on that
for
sword. Yeah.
Or has he effectively burned himself by that opinion?
That is true. The comments on that video, like it's a real damage to his his brand, his opinions, his credibility.
I will say it was
surprisingly
supportive. I think fans of your books are pretty supportive of the opposing opinion as well. You've cultivated a great fan base to allow that to happen.
Yeah, and there's a good range of opinion. I quite like the fact that there's very little agreement on what my best book is. Say,
yes,
there's a very wide spread of opinion. You can find people who'll argue for all of them up to a point. So that's always something to take pride in, I think.
That's a good point, because sometimes with authors you can go, that's their magnum opus, that's their book.
I'm just imagining how insulting. Not like, it must be just a little depressive for an author who has a clear best work or at least not necessarily them, but everyone knows them for that one book and think it's their best work, and yet they've written books afterward, and that just must be kind of devastating of writing all these books and going when am I ever going to be known for something else?
Right. The Ridley Scott effect.
It's true of most writers, though. It's true. Very few writers really have more than one successful series. I mean, pretty much all have kind of a central best known work and then other stuff that is much less known. I mean, even guys like George, obviously, The Song of Ice and Fire is kind of, I'm sure, massively more successful than a lot of his other, Fever Dream and things that are very successful and very well rated in their way, but I'm sure are much less successful. It's quite a rare trick to be able to have several very successful things, I would say. I mean, we should be so lucky as to have one.
I mean, we had that with author To Kill a Mockingbird. She stopped after that one book because she's like,
I've done it.
Where else am I going to go? It's the best-selling author. Worldwide success, global. It just blew numbers out of the water. And she's like, why write anything more? I'm not going to get this again. So,
but Harper Lee, she released, or they released a book of hers. Was it after her death, or was it It was quite recently, wasn't it?
There's some controversy around it. Personally, I won't read it because she did say she did not want it released. And then her lawyer basically had a document near to her death where she signed away that, it could be released. But we've consistently had from her of she's never wanted it released. And then her lawyer had a signed document at the very end of Yeah, sure.
I do that to you on your deathbed, so I can't blame him.
I don't know. It's to me it looked shady. Is
that what actually happened?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Basically. Yeah. Lawyers at the end of it. Oh. Lawyers and bankers.
The world is as grim as you put it out to be, Joe. It's a grim, strange place.
Far grimmer.
Yours are hopeful compared to the real world, right?
I think, though, people often say my stuff's very grim and dark and all that, and to me it just feels like it's part of the picture. I don't think I ever intend my books to kind of be the be-all and end-all statement of what life is like.
Yeah.
Which people sometimes seem to read them as and say, wow, man, life is not as bleak as this. But obviously you have a lot of very, very upbeat heroic fantasy novels to kind of... So I've always found that a bit odd myself as a criticism. Because it doesn't sit alone, does it? It sits with all the other stuff and is a comment on the other stuff. That's my way of looking at it anyway.
I know it's a kind of a basic question, but what do you think makes up that genre of grimdark, which you're often like put as one of the big grimdark fantasy authors? Like, are there things that would negate it being in a genre? Like if you had a hopeful protagonist or a positive ending, would that automatically make it not grimdark? Is it the setting? Is it the message of the story? What exactly makes something that?
I don't presume to have the answer to that. I mean, in a way, I'm the last guy who should have the answer to that. I think those sort of genre definitions are for readers and for readers to kind of argue over what is or isn't something. They're only any use insofar as they connect a reader to a certain kind of work they want to read anyway. Outside of that, what's the point of them? And, grimdark's particularly nebulous. I guess romance has, if you want to be a romance writer in the romance genre, there are certain specific rules you've got to follow, in the sense that there's a central couple who must end up together, right? That's a rule that you've got to follow within that genre. But generally speaking, they're really nebulous things. They're all in the eye of the beholder. And all the arguments about grimdark are always just plagued by definitional questions right from the start, because no one can ever agree on what is and isn't grimdark even, and everyone always takes the kind of most extreme definition. They'll say grimdark is a world of total nihilism in which there can be no success, and you think, well, have I ever read anything that's really that? Very little stuff is like that. I don't think much of what I write is nihilistic, really.
Would you call it existentialist?
Maybe. I certainly wouldn't call it nihilistic. Because, to me, nihilistic is there is no such thing as morality, really. There is no meaningful morality. I think in the first law and in my stuff generally, there very clearly is. It's just a lot of the characters don't meet the standard. Exactly. It's the difficulty of meeting that standard is the thing. And obviously a character like Bayaz is sort of a nihilist, an absolute might makes right. There is no such thing as morality other than what I can enforce. But he's very, spoiler warning, he's very obviously the villain, right?
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes you'll read it and people think, man, I love Bayaz, he's so great, isn't he brilliant? And you think, fuck, really?
No, that was the very clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
The bias portion that was clear. Clear villain,
I would hope so. There's a bunch of those type of movies I've heard of. Even directors saying like, going, hey, I know that you like my work, but if you say it's your favorite thing, it's kind of a red flag of like, really? You liked it for that reason? Like if you read the first one, I was like, oh yeah, Bayaz, my absolute favorite, absolute best character. So I'm going,
well, you can like him as a character.
You can like him as a character, but also, why do you like him? It's kind of like with Fight Club, of like,
yeah,
a little concerning. He's kind of the villain. Like you're not supposed to look at like, or Patrick Bateman from American Psycho, and like people loving that movie. It's like, why do you love it? You understand that he's kind of a serial killer. Like it's the negative. It's a cautionary tale rather than something to admire.
But a lot of your characters, Joe, a lot of them are bad people that are very rootable in a way. So it's It's
Oh,
difficult
yeah.
because I mean, you could say the same thing for Galactus, one of your favorite characters, Rich.
Oh, I know.
And he's not.
That's the fun part.
Yeah,
Is
see?
characters that, man, that is a real skill that I've heard from like newer authors are worried about making their characters likable and rootable, and often that will make them inauthentic. But that there's a feeling of a risk of making your characters do horrible things, and you're afraid that the reader will no longer want to follow them and will just stop reading there. I don't think you have that fear at all. It seems to be.
No, I mean, I suppose the fear I have is this character interesting?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Are they appealing? I don't know what quite the right phrase is, because people will have, there's very varied opinions about which characters work and which don't. You'll often see a thread on Reddit of someone saying, I really hated this character. And you'll think, oh, surprising. And the reasons are often quite odd, to my mind. But they vary hugely. You know, there's people who really dislike characters because they do something that they find reprehensible. But then the same readers will often love a character like Glockter, say, who seems to get away with doing truly abysmal and appalling things, you know. People, they'll often forgive someone who's self-aware and funny. You know, someone who's kind of self-aware, they're fine. As often, I suppose, and it is true with politics and things, hypocrisy is the one sin people can't really forgive. The character who kind of doesn't realize their own unpleasantness. People who know they're doing something horrible often get a pass, especially if they're funny.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you're funny, you get away with a lot of things.
Have you guys heard of that? The diagram, I don't know what they call it, but the warmth and competence
No, you got to
square,
explain this one.
where they say there's 4 categories of people, and you look at warmth and competence. If you are competent but not a warm person, people envy you because you do good things, but they're jealous or envious because you're not a good person, you're not warm. If you're warm but you're not a competent person, they say that you are. They'll kind of hand you they like you, but they can't rely on you, so it'll be more pity. Like, oh, look at that person, they're nice, they're kind, but they're not competent. If you're neither warm or kind, you're one of the dredges. But if you're both warm and this is said in business circles, they say if you're both warm and you're competent, you're a good leader. You're able to both, people look up to you, admire you, you're competent enough to do it. But in a way, maybe your characters are that self. That both Glock is competent, these other characters can be competent, but also that warmth of being able to I won't spoil too much, but in a scene does show a sign of goodness sometimes to specific people, and is self-aware enough to kind of look at himself and just go, is it coming from evil roots? But I guess there's some sort of warmth there there's just enough warmth that's the right term, where you don't hate the guy. Like it's a strange way. I don't know why it went that direction with it, but some sort of warmth.
It kind of explains my likability. Like, my favorite characters from the first trilogy would go, like, I loved Logan probably the most, then Glockta, then I loved to hate Giselle. Like, I enjoyed just not liking him.
Yeah.
And Giselle is neither warm or competent. Maybe that's why I enjoyed reading his perspective.
Well, to Joe's point, funny. You know, like,
yeah, no, it's funny, but
Yeah.
and then just the tragic nature of it, where Glockta is competent but not really warm, not as much. But Logan has, I think, both in times. Like, I mean, of course, plot going on, there's different things, but he's both warm in how he interacts with other characters, and he is a genuine leader, and then he's also incredibly competent, and he's self-aware, just like humble. So yeah, kind of follows into at least how I saw the characters.
Would you consider yourself a warm person, Joe?
I'm a cold incompetent.
Yeah,
which
makes people envious. Yeah. We envy you. It's the only way to think about it.
Incompetent, I was thinking. Cold and
incompetent.
Yeah. That's definitely my thing. I mean, I like incompetent characters.
Yeah,
you get a lot of very competent characters in fantasy, and so glorious successes, 1,000,000-to-1 shots that pay off. I like people who throw away golden opportunities and shit the bed when the odds are stacked in their favor. I find that hilarious and very true to life. Because a lot of military history is history of failures and disasters and mistakes more than it is history of success. So I've always kind of been interested in that. I love a Ladisler, a Prince Ladisler who kind of utterly shits the bed. And people will sometimes say this guy's just so ludicrously incompetent, no one would ever behave like this. And you think, man, the world is absolutely full of these people who do this constantly. Constantly. Military campaigns are just astonishing. The level of incompetence on show often.
I guess, Joe, to finish us off here, you have a book called Wind and Truth you wanted to promote.
I feel like Brandon needs you might not have heard of him. He's an author called Brandon Sanderson. He's a lovely guy.
Does he write? Does he write fantasy? Or is he?
He does. Yeah, he writes. Okay. He writes fantasy. He's just starting out, and I feel he needs a little leg up. He's not getting the props or the attention this month with his new book. So yeah,
he clearly
it'd be great
has,
if you guys could.
He doesn't have enough attention to get onto the Tutor Realm podcast. Really, that's the real sign.
And also, he's also too competent where it's like frustrating. Like, God, you are just a machine, and it's
one of these warm, competent guys.
Yeah.
He is.
Yeah, he
really is.
He's on there. He'll be on Daniel Green's show with the big numbers.
Damn it!
I can't hate him for how competent he is. He's too warm.
Oh, too damn warm. I guess, Joe, where can people find you? Any announcements, releases, anything you want to direct people toward?
Well, I'm still on Twitter at Lord Grimdark. I'm on there a bit less than I used to be, for sure. And I'm on Blue Sky as well, at joeabercrombie.com. And I'm on the internet at joeabercrombie.com also. So if anyone cared...
You haven't changed your handle to Lord Grim Dork yet?
Oh, that's a good one. You got him.
No.
That's my co-host.
No.
That was you get him. Yeah. Stupid book 3.
Very good. Also, the whole Lord Grimdark thing. I did that as a joke years ago, and then people started taking it seriously. So I'm trying to kind of back away from that now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, trying to back away from that and kind of move more into the Sarah J. Maas, Rebecca Yarros romantasy camp. That's the move. That's the smart move. I think
that's where the money is. That's where you got to go.
That's what I hear. It's where the readers are. Yes. Well, you can't rely on men to read. If anyone who's relying on men to read books now is on a loser, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely.
Wasting your time. Yeah.
Well, Joe, thank you a bunch for coming on. We really appreciate this long talk. Hopefully it didn't take too much of your time. And anybody, please go check out Joe Abercrombie. Of course, you've heard of him, but joeabercrombie.com. All will have links in the description below, as well as to Rich and I's Patreon, where we have a book club, and our merch. If you guys want our merch, go to tutorramble.com. However, Rich, anything to conclude with for these folks listening at home?
Like everything, a lot of these authors have really nebulous advice, but if you want to sum all author interviews that are talking about how do you get good, Joe's got it here. Do it, and then rewrite it, and then try it again. It's all work. There's nothing special. There's no secret sauce.
That was
another chair time.
There we go. Another hour and a half of your time, Joe. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Bye everybody.